Research is hard, but your tools should not be. Subthesis.com is the free alternative to expensive software. Whether you need to calculate Cronbach's alpha or organize your field notes, Subthesis has a tool for it. No paywalls and no registration required. Check the link in the description and let's dive into today's lesson. Welcome to Section C of the Graduate School Prep Series, focused on academic skills fundamentals. We begin with one of the most essential skills for graduate success, reading academic papers efficiently. Graduate school requires reading enormous amounts of academic literature. Research papers, review articles, theoretical pieces, and methodological works pile up relentlessly. If you try to read every paper cover to cover like you would a novel, you'll drown. Most graduate students aren't taught how to read strategically. They struggle through papers slowly, missing key information while getting lost in details that don't matter for their purposes. This inefficiency wastes time and creates unnecessary stress. By the end of this video, you'll have a systematic approach to reading academic papers that extracts what you need efficiently, whether you're surveying a field, reviewing for a specific project, or deeply engaging with a critical source. Here's what you'll learn. First, you'll apply strategic reading approaches that match your reading intensity to your purpose. Different goals require different approaches. Second, you'll identify the key components of academic papers and know where to find essential information quickly. Paper structure becomes your navigation tool. Third, you'll develop techniques for extracting relevant information without reading every word. Strategic reading is about efficiency, not shortcuts that sacrifice understanding. Fourth, you'll create systems for managing and retaining information from papers. Reading is only valuable if you can find and use what you've learned later. Let's start with understanding why strategic reading matters. The reading challenge in graduate school is real and substantial. Courses assign dozens of papers weekly, sometimes hundreds of pages of reading per class. Multiple courses multiply this load. The reading assigned often exceeds what's humanly possible if approached traditionally. Research requires surveying hundreds of sources to understand a field, identify gaps, and position your work. A thorough literature review might require engaging with 200 or more papers. You can't deeply read 200 papers while also doing everything else graduate school requires. Reading everything thoroughly is simply impossible given the volume. Attempting it leads to falling behind, skimming desperately without retention, or neglecting other responsibilities. Something has to give. Strategic reading is therefore a survival skill, not a shortcut. It's how successful academics manage the information load. They read purposefully, matching depth to need, and they do it systematically. Think of reading as happening at 3 levels of depth. Survey reading is quick assessment. In 5 to 10 minutes, you determine what a paper is about, whether it's relevant to your needs, and what the key takeaways are. Most papers you encounter will only receive survey reading. That's appropriate. Selective reading engages specific sections for needed information. You've determined the paper is relevant, and now you're extracting particular information, their methodology, a specific finding, how they define a concept. You read some sections carefully while skipping others entirely. Deep reading involves thorough engagement with critical sources. These are papers central to your work that require full attention, foundational theory in your area, papers you'll cite heavily, work you're building directly upon. Deep reading is reserved for papers that genuinely merit it. The key insight is that different papers deserve different levels of engagement. Treating every paper the same way, whether all shallow or all deep, is inefficient. Match reading depth to paper importance and your purpose. Survey reading follows a specific pattern that efficiently extracts key information. Start with title, abstract, and keywords. The title tells you the topic. The abstract summarizes the entire paper in a few hundred words. The question, methods, findings, and implications. Keywords indicate the conceptual territory. Often the abstract tells you everything you need. Scan section headings to understand structure. Headings reveal how the paper is organized and what topics it covers. This structural overview helps you locate specific information later if you need to return for selective reading. Look at figures, tables, and their captions. Visual elements often convey key findings more efficiently than text. A well-designed table or figure can communicate results that take pages to describe in prose. Read the introduction's last paragraph and the conclusion. The introduction's end typically states the paper's specific aims or contribution. The conclusion summarizes findings and their implications. Together, these bookends capture the paper's core. Survey reading should take 5 to 10 minutes maximum. It's triage, determining how to allocate further reading time. Selective reading extracts specific information from papers you've determined are relevant. Know what you're looking for before you start. Are you seeking their methodology, a specific finding, how they define a construct, their theoretical framework? A clear question focuses your reading and prevents aimless wandering through the paper. Use section headings to navigate to relevant sections. If you need methodology, go to the methods section. If you need their findings about a specific variable, go to results and search for that variable. Don't read sequentially when you need specific information. Read relevant sections thoroughly while skipping others entirely. You might carefully read the methodology and completely ignore the discussion if your purpose is methodological. It's okay to ignore sections that don't serve your purpose. Take notes on exactly what you found as you go. Extracting information into your own words helps retention and creates records for later use. Note the page numbers so you can return if needed. Selective reading might take 15 to 45 minutes depending on how much information you need. It's purposeful extraction, not comprehensive engagement. Deep reading is full engagement reserved for papers that genuinely merit it. Reserve deep reading for papers central to your work, your advisor's seminal paper, foundational theory in your area, the study you're attempting to replicate or extend, papers you'll cite repeatedly and need to understand completely. Read thoroughly with active questioning. Don't just absorb, interrogate. What's the argument? Is the evidence convincing? What assumptions underlie the analysis? How does this connect to other work? What are the limitations the authors don't acknowledge? Take extensive notes and annotations. Mark up the paper physically or digitally. Write summaries in your own words. Record your reactions and questions. Create connections to other reading. Deep reading produces rich notes, not just highlights. Deep reading may require multiple readings. Complex theoretical works or methodologically sophisticated papers often don't yield their full meaning in one pass. Plan for multiple engagements with your most important sources. Deep reading might take several hours per paper. This investment is worthwhile for truly important sources, but should be made sparingly given time constraints. Understanding standard paper structure helps you navigate efficiently. The abstract provides a summary of the entire paper in miniature, research question, methods, key findings, and implications condensed into a few hundred words. For survey reading, the abstract might tell you everything you need. The introduction provides context and problem statement. It situates the work within the field, identifies the gap or question addressed, and states the specific aims. The introduction's end usually contains the clearest statement of what the paper contributes. The methods section explains what they did. This is essential if you need methodological details, want to evaluate the quality of the research, or are considering replicating the study. The results section reports what they found. Here you find the data, statistical analyses, and findings. Tables and figures often convey results more efficiently than text. The discussion interprets what the findings mean. Here, authors connect findings to theory, acknowledge limitations, and suggest implications. This is where you find their interpretation, which you may or may not agree with. Not all papers follow this exact structure, but most empirical papers approximate it. Theoretical and methodological papers have different structures, but still have navigable components. The abstract deserves strategic attention because it contains the paper in concentrated form. Identify the research question or objective. What did they set out to investigate or accomplish? This tells you immediately whether the paper is potentially relevant to your interests. Note the methodological approach. Qualitative or quantitative? What type of study design? What population or context? Methodological mismatch with your needs might indicate limited relevance regardless of topic. Capture the key findings. What did they discover? The abstract should state main findings clearly, though necessarily briefly. This preview helps you decide whether the detailed findings warrant further reading. Understand the claimed significance. Why do the authors think this matters? Their framing of importance helps you assess relevance to your work and evaluate whether you share their assessment of significance. A well-read abstract might provide everything you need from many papers. When time is limited, strategic abstract reading helps you process more sources than thorough reading would allow. Introductions follow a predictable structure that aids navigation. First paragraphs establish broad context and importance. Why should anyone care about this topic? What's the general problem? This framing is often skimmable if you already know the field. Middle paragraphs review relevant literature and identify the gap. What have others done? What remains unknown or unresolved? This literature review can be valuable for finding additional sources, but it's often summarizing work you might read directly. Final paragraphs state specific aims and contribution. This is often the most valuable part of the introduction. What exactly does this paper do? What's its specific contribution? Authors usually make their strongest claims here about what their work adds. The gap statement is crucial. It's the moment where authors say something like, however, no previous study has examined, or what remains unclear is. This statement tells you why this paper exists and what it claims to contribute uniquely. Find the gap statement and you understand the paper's claimed purpose. Method sections contain technical details that matter differently depending on your purpose. Study design and approach tells you fundamentally what kind of study this is. Randomized trial, cross-sectional survey, qualitative interviews, case study. The design shapes how you interpret everything else. Population and sampling describes who or what was studied. How were participants selected? How representative are they? Sample size and composition affect the generalizability and trustworthiness of findings. Data collection procedures explain how information was gathered, what instruments or measures were used, what procedures did participants undergo. These details matter for evaluating quality and for potential replication. Analysis methods describe how data was processed, statistical techniques for quantitative work, analytical frameworks for qualitative work. Understanding the analysis helps you evaluate whether findings are well supported. For many purposes, you can skim methods. But if you're evaluating research quality, considering replication, or need methodological details for your own work, the methods section requires careful attention. The results section contains the findings, but not all findings matter equally for your purposes. Tables and figures often convey findings most efficiently. A good table can communicate what takes paragraphs to describe in text. Prioritize visual elements, especially when surveying papers quickly. Read figure captions and table notes carefully. Captions often explain exactly what the visual represents and highlight key points. Table notes explain abbreviations, sample sizes, and analytical details. These textual elements unlock visual content. Look for effect sizes, not just statistical significance. Statistical significance tells you whether an effect likely exists. Effect size tells you whether it's meaningful. Small effects can be statistically significant with large samples, but practically unimportant. Identify which findings are most relevant to your needs. A paper might report 20 findings, but only 2 relate to your work. Learn to scan results for what you specifically need rather than processing everything equally. Results sections can be tedious to read comprehensively. Strategic scanning for relevant findings is usually more efficient. Discussion sections interpret findings, which requires critical reading. The first paragraphs usually summarize key findings. This summary can provide a useful recap if you've skipped or skimmed the results section. Authors highlight what they consider most important. Interpretation and implications reflect the author's spin. How do they explain their findings? What do they think the findings mean? You don't have to accept their interpretation. Authors often overclaim or downplay aspects of their work. Read interpretations critically. The limitations section is valuable for your own critiques. Authors usually acknowledge some limitations of their work. Note what they mention, but also consider what they omit. Their stated limitations may be incomplete or strategically chosen. Future directions might generate ideas for your work. Authors often suggest what should come next. These suggestions might spark research ideas, or they might reveal blind spots if they don't mention directions you find important. Discussions are where authors most clearly reveal their perspective. Read critically, distinguishing their findings from their interpretations of those findings. Active reading techniques increase comprehension and retention. Question as you read. Don't passively absorb, actively interrogate. Why did they do it this way? So what if this finding is true? What evidence supports this claim? Questioning engages your critical faculties. Predict before reading sections. Before reading results, predict what you expect they found. Before reading discussion, predict how they'll interpret findings. When predictions differ from reality, that gap highlights important learning. Connect to what you already know. How does this relate to other papers you've read? Does it support or contradict other findings? Where does it fit in the field? Connections create memory networks that aid retention and recall. Argue with the authors in your head. Don't accept everything uncritically. Push back on claims that seem unsupported. Notice assumptions you disagree with. Mental argumentation deepens engagement and develops critical thinking. Active reading takes more mental energy than passive absorption, but the payoff in comprehension and retention justifies the effort, especially for important papers. Effective note-taking transforms reading into usable knowledge. Capture key information in your own words. Paraphrasing forces understanding. If you can't restate an idea in your own words, you probably don't fully understand it. Direct quotes should be occasional and for specific purpose. Record full citation information for every paper. When you need to cite something months later, finding it again shouldn't require researching. Capture author, year, title, journal, and DOI, or link at minimum. Note connections, questions, and critiques alongside content notes. What does this remind you of? What questions does it raise? What do you disagree with? These meta notes capture your intellectual engagement, not just the paper's content. Create retrievable records you can search later. Notes only have value if you can find and use them. Digital notes enable searching. Consistent formatting enables scanning. Whatever system you use, retrievability is essential. Different systems work for different people. Digital reference managers, physical notebooks, index card systems, dedicated apps. Find what works for you and use it consistently. Reference managers are essential tools for managing academic reading. Popular options include Zotero, Mendeley, and EndNote. Each has strengths, all are far better than no system. Choose one and learn to use it well. These tools store citation information and organize your library. You can search, sort, and browse your collected references. Folders, collections, and tags create organization schemes. Your accumulated reading becomes a searchable database. Attach PDFs directly to citation records. Instead of having PDFs scattered across your computer, attach them to their citations. This keeps content and metadata together, making retrieval straightforward. Add tags and notes for later retrieval. Tag papers by topic, method, or relevance to specific projects. Add notes capturing your reading. These additions make your library more than a citation list. They make it a knowledge repository. Generate citations and bibliographies automatically. When writing, insert citations that automatically format correctly. Generate bibliographies that update as you add citations. This automation saves hours and reduces formatting errors. Investing time in learning your reference manager pays dividends throughout graduate school and beyond. Managing high reading volume requires systematic approaches. Triage incoming papers quickly using survey reading. New papers arrive constantly from courses, searches, recommendations, and alerts. Quickly assess each to determine whether it needs deeper reading, future attention, or dismissal. Create a reading queue with priorities. Not everything can be read immediately. Maintain a list of papers to read. Organize by priority and deadline. Return to this queue during reading time. Schedule dedicated reading time in your calendar. Reading often gets squeezed out by more urgent demands. Protecting specific time for reading ensures it actually happens. Some people read best in morning, others prefer evening. Know yourself. Accept that you can't read everything. Even with efficient strategies, you'll never read all potentially relevant literature. Make peace with this. Focus on reading what's most important for your specific work rather than attempting impossible comprehensiveness. Strategic reading accepts limits. Trying to read everything leads to reading nothing well. prioritize ruthlessly. Your reading purpose should determine your approach. For literature reviews, survey widely to map the field, then read selectively for papers that merit inclusion. You might survey 100 papers to select 20 for closer reading and 10 for deep engagement. For course preparation, match your reading depth to expected class discussion. If the seminar will focus deeply on one paper, read that deeply. If you're expected to discuss multiple papers briefly, survey reading may suffice. For research projects, identify the papers central to your work and read them deeply. These are your foundation. Surrounding literature can be read more selectively based on specific needs. For staying current in your field, regular survey reading of new publications maintains awareness without overwhelming commitment. Skim tables of contents, read abstracts, and occasionally dive deeper when something particularly relevant appears. Adjusting approach to purpose prevents both overinvestment in peripheral papers and underinvestment in critical ones. Avoid these common reading mistakes. Reading everything at the same depth wastes time on papers that don't merit it or gives insufficient attention to papers that do. Match depth to importance and purpose. Not all papers deserve deep reading. Starting at the beginning and reading linearly like a novel is inefficient for academic papers. Papers aren't structured for linear reading. Jump to the sections that serve your purpose and skip sections that don't. Not taking notes leaves you unable to recall or use what you've read. Taking notes in ways you can't search or retrieve later creates work that can't be leveraged. Build note-taking systems that serve future you. Reading without clear purpose leads to aimless wandering through papers without extracting what you need. Know what you're looking for before you start. Purpose focuses reading and increases efficiency. These mistakes are common among early graduate students who approach academic reading like undergraduate textbook reading. Unlearning these habits accelerates your reading productivity. Let's summarize the key points about reading academic papers efficiently. Match reading depth to paper importance and your purpose. Survey most papers quickly. Read selectively from papers with specific relevant content. Reserve deep reading for papers central to your work. Different papers deserve different investment. Use paper structure to navigate efficiently. Understand where information lives in standard paper formats. Abstract for overview, introduction for aims, methods for procedures, results for findings, discussion for interpretation. Navigate to what you need rather than reading sequentially. Read actively, questioning and connecting as you go. Passive absorption yields poor comprehension and retention. Active engagement through questioning, predicting, and arguing deepens understanding and creates memorable learning. Build systems for note-taking and reference management. Reading is only valuable if you can access what you've learned later. Reference managers organize your library. Effective notes capture both content and your engagement. Systems enable retrieval. In our next video, we'll discuss note-taking systems specifically designed for graduate study, building on these reading strategies. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you in the next video. Writing the thesis is a marathon, not a sprint, but you do not have to run it alone. If you are feeling stuck with your data or overwhelmed by your sources, let us help. Head over to subthesis.com. It is completely free and designed to make your life easier. You are making progress. Keep going. And don't forget to subscribe for more support.